Bernie Sanders might be fucking retarded. And it is becoming more and more clear that the people who continue to support him really are ignoring the fact that he's undergone this real, I guess, transformation into basically a pawn of what I can only call the Democratic leadership, okay? With this admission that, or I don't know if it's an admission, but his statement that he could see himself granting voting rights back to the Tsarnaev, well, not the Tsarnaev brothers, but Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston bomber, the remaining Boston bomber. This shows somebody who doesn't really know when an issue has its limit, okay? There are good ideas, and then there are good ideas taken to the logical extreme, which is something you're not supposed to arrive at, okay? For example, the WIC program, which is in order to give food, you give people some money, particularly women, infants, and children. That's why it's called WIC, because those people might be vulnerable. Now, we can debate whether it's a good idea or not. We can discuss whether it's been effective, but it's an idea that hasn't arrived at its logical extreme. Now, when you talk about an idea like taking everyone's money and distributing it among everybody, that's a logical extreme. Okay, taking all the food in the country, even the one like the food that's unsold and gets thrown out, and forcing companies to give it over and distribute it among the population, even if they end up losing it, that is the logical extreme, because ultimately, in the future, those companies are not going to want to produce the food, and eventually we're just going to have less types of food and a less abundance of it. Now, what the Tsarnaev brothers, what does that have to do with it? Okay, you talk about a person like, there's a lot of people who would consider themselves criminal justice reformists. You can talk about people who want to expand voters' rights. I'll be blunt. Okay, I don't think that voters' rights are really being curtailed that much, but I could see myself supporting, for example, felons that have been out of prison for 4 years, felons that have gone through a diversion program. I could see myself supporting them getting their voting rights. It's not the worst thing in the world for people who have been to prison to be able to vote for, people to represent them. I mean, they're being represented too. If they get out of prison and they end up paying taxes, they're the same as any one of us. Except for the fact that they're a convicted felon and they can't vote yet, or they can't vote at all. But the fact of the matter is that, a lot of people would see this proposal to put somebody who is a violent felon as plainly ridiculous. And you're talking, let's say myself, okay? No, I'm not progressive, but I am not a fan of the death penalty. I think the death penalty is, it's kind of not in the spirit of the due process of an American citizen. Now, I think it's a debatable proposition. I just would say that I'm personally against it. You can talk about, the drug laws. I feel that people that have been convicted of drug offenses, of course there's extremes where I would say they shouldn't be able to vote. And I would say that there's extremes where you would see people, for example, some of these physicians that are overprescribing medications like opioids. I would say you do have to put them in prison, and I would certainly say you might have to limit some of their rights going forward after that. It's kind of a gray area. But giving the right to vote to somebody like Dzhokhar Tsarnaev while he is serving in prison, as Bernie Sanders answered yesterday, I think it was Anderson Cooper was on stage. He was the moderator of that town hall that they had. That might be one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard in my life. Giving offenders who have admitted to and have committed acts that are, deliberately intended to harm people, the right to vote back is what does that really accomplish? Especially somebody, we don't know whether Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is repentant or not, but I would say it's difficult. Even if he were, it would be probably a bad idea to give him the right to vote. He deprived a number of other people of their right to life. There were people whose limbs were blown off by Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and his pressure cooker bombs. The Boston bomber harmed people in a very tangible way. And who's next then? You're going to have people, for example, some of these serial killers getting the right to vote back. This is a good question to pose. Here's some other people you should ask Bernie Sanders if they should have their right to vote back, given that they're serving time in federal prison for felonies. Should the Unabomber have the right to vote back? Okay, the Unabomber, he's not committed a crime since he was convicted in what was it, like 2000? Like I think it was in the 2000s. He was convicted. He was caught, I believe, in 1998 or so. So the the Unabomber. What about, for example, Bernie Madoff? He's serving time in federal prison. Should he be given the right to vote back? You're talking about a white-collar criminal. I'm sure if he said that Bernie Madoff has the right to vote, Bernie Sanders would lose a lot of Bernie fans for supporting Bernie Madoff's right to vote. How about, what's that guy's name? Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro. Should he have the right to vote back? I think he was convicted. I think he is a convicted felon now. Okay, and Martin Shkreli, I think, is a gray area. So, yeah, I think it's a real good question. I would certainly put that as a valid question. Should he get his right to vote back if he gets out of prison? But why should he have the right to vote if he's serving a federal sentence on whatever it was? I think it was insider trading. What other people? You have Dylan Roof, the Charleston church shooter. Should he get the right to vote back? What about, there's the, what's that guy's name? Mark Barton, I think his name was. The guy who murdered his 4 or 5 other co-workers in Atlanta. I think that's his name. If I'm getting his name wrong, sorry for the Mark Bartons out there. What about all of these horrible murderers that have been out there in the pen for so many years? What about Suge Knight? Okay, Suge Knight's been in prison several times. Okay, how many other people? What about, El Chapo? That would be a good question. El Chapo, who's not even a U.S. citizen, but is now in U.S. prison, and he is, I believe he's already been convicted. Should El Chapo get the right to vote? Because now they're saying no human being is illegal, and El Chapo is in prison, and he is, I guess you could say, well, he's not an undocumented immigrant because he's in the prison system, and that would mean he's documented. But you're starting to get the drift here. How many of these ridiculous cases would they have to go through if they asked Bernie Sanders? The Boston bomber is already pretty extreme. Look at all of these other people that were put in prison for heinous crimes, and they'd be considered convicted felons if they are U.S. citizens. I'm not saying all of them are. And what would it take for Bernie Sanders to admit that there's a certain standard you have to meet in order to be able to vote in a U.S. election, and serving time for a felony should be something that precludes you from having the right to vote, at least until you've left the prison system, you've regained your freedom, okay, and you've had a little time to acclimate back to society and prove that you're not a threat to the other people around you. I think that this is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. I didn't immediately make a video out of it, but it's got to be something that should weigh on the mind of those people thinking of voting for Bernie Sanders in 2020. I would suggest, personally, if you're so inclined, you should vote for Tulsi Gabbard or for Andrew Yang. I think this is so far out there. I don't know how people can continue to take this clown seriously.